Well, it's Monday morning, and as part of the social etiquette, we ask each other, what did you do on the weekend? And there's pressure on us to say we did something exciting, like I played in a rock band, or I climbed a mountain, or I jumped out of a plane. You see, there's this idea that somehow we're meant to be doing something exciting. And if we didn't do something exciting, we feel bad about it, like we had a weekend fail. But where do we get this idea that we should be doing fun things, exciting things? And what will we gain from it anyway? What is the point? In other words, our question is this: how do we find meaning in our search for pleasure? So welcome again to our February series. In this month, we're looking at the topic of how can I find meaning? And our questions are these: how can I find meaning in the daily grind? How can I find meaning in the search for knowledge? How can I find meaning in the pursuit of pleasure? And how can I find meaning in the drudgery of work? And what we're going to do this month is week by week, one by one, go through each of these questions and see what the Bible, in particular a book called Ecclesiastes, has to say. And this is going to come in the form of a 20-minute talk from me, followed by a time of question and answer from you guys. And today is week 3, question 3, how can I find meaning in the pursuit of pleasure? And I'm going to define the pursuit of pleasure as this: it's us looking for something that we enjoy, that's fun, that pleases the senses, that's pleasant, that's pleasurable. That is the pursuit of pleasure. Now, in the outline in front of us, you see there are some chunks of the Bible, and there's also an outline on the right-hand side. Now, in the chunks of Bible, in the second chunk, it says this, Ecclesiastes 2, I denied myself nothing my eyes desired. I refused my heart no pleasure. My heart took delight in all my labour, and this was the reward for all my toil. Yet, when I surveyed all that my hands had done and what I had toiled to achieve, everything was meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Nothing was gained under the sun. The person who writes Ecclesiastes was looking for pleasure, just like we are, and at the end says, but what did I gain? What was the point of it all? Why do we search for pleasure? And that's the question we're looking at today. How can we find meaning in our search for pleasure? And in the outline in front of us, you see there are going to be 3 parts to my talk. In the first part, we'll look at why pleasure is good. Chasing pleasure is good. Middle part, some problems with chasing pleasure. And in the final part of the talk, a solution. So let's go to the first part of the talk, where I'm going to say, actually, pleasure is a good thing. Now, maybe some well-meaning religious people think that chasing pleasure is a bad thing, that to be more holy, we need to deny ourselves pleasure. But chasing pleasure is actually a good thing. Pleasure is a good thing. Last year, I needed a shoulder operation, and I work at a hospital one day a week as a doctor, so I actually went to my own hospital where I knew all the nurses and doctors, and I needed a shoulder operation because I had ruptured my biceps tendon. I pulled the tendon off the bone, and this is the operation they had to do. They cut open your arm, they find the biceps tendon, you can see it up the top, and then they put all these stitches into it. Then they drill a hole into your bone, you can see it down in the bottom third, the hole, and then they have to shove the tendon into that hole and hold it down with a screw. Now that sounds really painful, doesn't it? Except for this thing that the doctors have called anesthesia. With anesthesia, they fill you up with happy drugs, and it's actually very pleasant. I enjoyed my anesthesia so much when I woke up, they couldn't stop me talking. And even this little head in my voice in my head kept saying, stop talking, but I could not stop talking. I was so happy from the anesthesia. Now, I could have chosen to be holy and said, I would deny myself anesthesia. I choose pain instead. But that's not being holy, that's being foolish. The wise thing to do here would be to choose the anesthesia, to choose pleasure over pain. See, pain is a warning sign that our body gives us. If we put our hand in the fire, pain tells us to take our hand out of the fire. On a hot day when we drink a bottle of ice cold water. That's pleasure. The drive for pleasure is keeping us alive there. Pleasure is a good thing. We choose pleasure and not pain. And for children, we wish that they have pleasure and not pain as well. We want children to have a pleasant life, not a painful life. We want them to be warm, not cold. We want them to have a pleasant school experience. We don't want them to be bullied. We want them to have a home. We don't want them to be homeless. So we wish a life of pleasure for children, not a life of pain. Choosing pleasure is a good thing. And maybe we too wish pleasure for our own life. And so pleasure is a good thing, and I think the Bible argues it's also a good thing, and it's a God-given thing. But let's come to the middle part of the talk now, and let's look at what some problems might be in chasing pleasure. And here I suggest two things. Number one problem is this. There's what philosophers called the hedonist fallacy. And the hedonist fallacy goes like this. By chasing pleasure, I actually won't find pleasure. Because pleasure is not an entity, it's not an object, so if I look for it, I actually can't find it. Pleasure might be the byproduct of something else, but if I look for pleasure, I actually won't find it. That's the hedonist fallacy. And maybe that's why New Year's Eve parties are so disappointing. We turn up and we know somehow we should be having fun, but the party just can't deliver what it's promising. And so then we go hopping from bar to bar, party to party, looking for the pleasure that we're looking for, but we don't find it. That's a hedonist fallacy. By looking for pleasure, we actually won't find it. And even if we do find it, there's a second problem. And it's what psychologists call hedonic adaptation. And all that means is this. Whatever once gave us pleasure gives us less and less pleasure the next time. When I wake up in the morning, I have my first cup of coffee, and it gives me this buzz that goes all the way from my head to my toes. Then I turn up to work, and I have my second cup of coffee, and it gives me a smaller buzz, not the big buzz I had before. And then in the afternoon, we have a staff meeting, and that's when I have my third cup of coffee, and this one gives me no buzz. I'm in the staff meeting. That's because I've adapted to the coffee. And it's the same with pleasure. We adapt to what gives us pleasure. Whatever once gave us this much pleasure gives us less and less pleasure the next time. It's like children on a swing always saying, push me higher, higher, higher. They need more buzz, more hit, more pleasure. And after a while you have to say, this is as high as it can go. It's why children beg and plead for a new toy. You buy them a toy, it gives them intense pleasure for a few weeks, and then they get sick of it and they stop playing with it. And it's the same with us and whatever gives us pleasure. Maybe it's the toys we own, maybe it's the job, maybe it's even our partner. In Germany, they did this study. It was the Marriage and Life Satisfaction Survey, and they found this. So on the left, that's before people get married. In the middle, that's when you get married. And down there, that's 5 years after marriage. And on a scale of 0 to 10, before you're married, when you're single, you're satisfied with life, 3 out of 10. And you see, as you walk along, suddenly, 2 years before you're married, you meet someone, and so now there's a little spike in life satisfaction. 1 year out, that's probably when you get engaged. Oh, now you're really happy, 5 out of 10. You get married, oh, you're buzzed, 6 out of 10. And then 1 year into marriage, it starts coming down. 2 years into the marriage, you're almost back to where you were before. And 5 years after marriage, you're less happy than you were before you were married. So single people always wishing they were married people wishing they were single again. And everyone wants to laugh, but everyone's too scared to laugh right now, aren't they? Like, my wife is next to me. This is not funny. Not funny. That's not us. That's not us up there. And so whatever once gave us this much pleasure gives us less and less pleasure the next time. And if we look at the Bible reading in that first chunk, the writer is saying the same thing. I said to myself, come now, I will test you with pleasure to find out what is good. And I tried cheering myself with wine and embracing folly. And then we'll jump ahead. I undertook great projects. I built houses for myself. I planted vineyards. I made gardens and parks and planted all kinds of fruit trees in them. I also owned more herds and flocks than anyone in Jerusalem before me. I amassed silver and gold for myself and the treasure of kings and provinces. I acquired male and female singers and a harem as well, the delights of a man's heart. I denied myself nothing my eyes desired. I refused my heart no pleasure. My heart took delight in all my labour, and this was the reward for all my toil. Yet, when I surveyed all that my hands had done and what I had toiled to achieve, everything was meaningless. Chasing after the wind, nothing was gained under the sun. This person is searching for pleasure in so many different places. He cannot find pleasure, and even if he does, it seems to give him less and less pleasure the next time. This is the problem in our search for pleasure. So what's a solution? This is the final third of the talk, and maybe I can suggest three things. Number one, we need purpose as well as pleasure. This is Paul Dolan. He's a regular TED speaker. He's speaking at one of the TED Talks here, and he has a PhD in happiness. He's a happiness expert, and he's written a book called Happiness by Design, Finding Pleasure and Purpose in Everyday Life. And the title of the book sums up his main argument. His main argument is this: we're all trying to be happy in life, and we will find happiness if we have two things: pleasure and purpose. And then Paul Dolan argues, but pleasure by itself actually won't do it. And there are many things that give us pleasure, like eating pizza, watching TV on a Friday night. But if that's all we do, soon life feels a little bit empty. So what we need as well as pleasure is purpose. And Paul Dolan argues there are many things that give us purpose which actually aren't pleasurable, but they give us purpose. And that leads to happiness. For example, studying for an exam, purposeful, but not pleasant. Giving birth to a child, purposeful, not pleasant. Helping a friend move house, purposeful, not pleasant, but somehow richly fulfilling and satisfying. So Paul Dolan argues it's not just pleasure that we need, we actually need purpose. And it's purpose that leads to happiness and satisfaction. And the Bible writer seems to be saying the same thing. He says in Ecclesiastes chapter 3, and I think this is the third chunk in front of you, I have seen the burden God has laid on the human race. And what is this burden? Look what he says. God has made everything beautiful in its time, but he's also set eternity in the human heart. Yet no one can fathom what God has done from beginning to end. Look at what those two sentences are saying. The first sentence is saying God has made everything beautiful in its time. There are things that will give us pleasure that God gives us. But the second sentence is saying we also need purpose. God has set eternity. We have a cry for transcendent purpose in our human hearts, yet we can't seem to find what this purpose is. And that's why we're unsettled and our lives are empty. We need both pleasure and purpose. And it's purpose that's driving us. So that's the first thing we need. We need purpose as well as pleasure. The second thing we can do is this. Just enjoy the gifts that God has given us just for what they are. But don't make any more or less of them than what they are. This is my midlife crisis purchase. It's my Jeep. It's my two-door Jeep. I bought it 2 years ago. And when I bought it, everyone comes up to me and they say that Jeep ad. Oh, he bought a Jeep, he bought a Jeep, he bought a Jeep. And I just have to grin and laugh along. Okay, yeah, I bought a Jeep, I bought a Jeep. But the Jeep ads are amazing, aren't they? They promise if you buy a Jeep, you will have freedom, adventure, identity. Your neighbours will envy you. Your children will worship you. And your wife will embrace you. You will be the uber masculine man in her life that she's been waiting to come into life and sweep her off her feet. And of course we laugh at those ads because we know, come on, it's just a car. Get over it. It's a car that gets you from point A to point B. It uses twice the amount of petrol a normal car would. And yes, every now and then you can go off-road if you want, get a bit of mud on it. Yes, it gives you fun, but it's just a car. And if you think this thing is going to give you freedom, adventure, identity, and your wife will love you more because you bought this, well, you're dreaming. It's just a car. But enjoy it for what it is. It's a car that gets you from point A to point B and take it off-road every now and then. But don't make it more than what it is, your identity or your purpose. And the Bible writer seems to be saying the same thing in Ecclesiastes chapter 3. I know that there is nothing better for people than to be happy, to do good while they live, that each of them may eat and drink and drive their jeeps and find satisfaction in this. And this is the gift from God. And I think what this is saying is God gives us good things to enjoy, to give us pleasure, but that's all they are. They're a gift, but they're not God. So don't ask them to be God, the identity and purpose in our life. The third thing I think we can do is this: know and worship the God who's behind this universe. Well, what do I mean by this? Know and worship the God behind this universe. Well, this is Sophie Scott, and she's a laughter expert. And this is her giving a TED Talk on laughter. And according to Sophie Scott, we are 30 times more likely to laugh at something if we're with someone than if we were alone. And especially if we're with someone we know and trust. And so pleasure comes not so much from what we do, but who we're with at the time. That's what gives us pleasure. See, these are things that do give pleasure. Imagine eating a fine meal, or watching a movie, or traveling. They give pleasure, but did you notice they're only fun if we're doing them with someone else? They're not so much fun if we're always doing them by ourselves, eating a meal alone, watching a movie alone, traveling alone. And if we do those things by ourselves, what do? We take selfies and we upload the photos on Facebook and Instagram to share them with our friends. See, fun is meant to be shared. It's not so much what we do, it's who we're with at the time that delivers pleasure. It's whether we're with someone that we know and trust. And maybe that's why New Year's Eve parties are so disappointing. We're actually looking for the right people to be with. And the search for pleasure isn't just leading to emptiness, it's leading to loneliness. And as we go from party to party, bar to bar, we're actually looking for the right people. And that will give us the pleasure we're looking for. And maybe our search for pleasure is actually a search for God. Because without God, we are empty for God and lonely for God. And without God, no matter what we're trying to do for pleasure, we stay empty and we stay lonely. But if we are right with God, then we can enjoy the gifts that He's given us for pleasure, as well as enjoying the God who gives us the gifts. It's not so much what we do, it's who we're with that gives us pleasure. And I think that's what the writer's saying in Ecclesiastes 3. I know that there's nothing better for people than to be happy, to do good while they live, that each of them may eat and drink and find satisfaction in all their toil. This is the gift from God. And why does God give this gift? I know that everything God does will endure forever. Nothing can be added to it or taken from it. God does it so people will fear Him. God gives us good gifts to enjoy, to give us pleasure. But why? So that we can worship and know the giver of the gift, God as well. So do you remember our original question? It was this: how can I find meaning in our search for pleasure? Today I've argued that if we just look for pleasure, we won't find it, and whatever gives us pleasure will give us less and less pleasure the next time. But maybe the solution is enjoy the gifts that God has given us to give us pleasure just for what they are, gifts from God, but we also need to know and worship the God who gives us the gifts, because he will give us purpose. And without God, we stay empty and lonely for God. But with God, now we can enjoy the gifts he's given us in relationship with God. Well, many years ago, when I was a young doctor, for my summer holiday, I did this. I did a ski instructor's course in Canada. I lived on snow, Whistler, Canada, and I skied every day for 5 weeks. And we stayed on snow, and that meant you just open the front door, you click in your skis, and you just skied out your front door. And at the end of the day, you just skied back into your little chateau. For 5 weeks, I was skiing, getting ski instructions, doing a ski instructor's course in Canada, Whistler, Canada. But you know, after just about 2 weeks of doing this, I felt really empty and also felt lonely. And after a while I said, who am I kidding? This is pointless. I'm just going up and down a mountain. Why am I going up and down a mountain? I don't go up the mountain on the chairlift. I don't have to come down the mountain. What am I doing? I'm just going up and down a mountain over and over and over again. This is empty. This is lonely. And so I pulled out my Bible and it sort of fell open at Psalm 84. And this is what I read. How lovely is your dwelling place, Lord Almighty. My soul yearns, even faints, for the courts of the Lord. My heart and my flesh cry out for the living God. Better is one day in your courts than 1,000 elsewhere. And I thought, yes, that's it. Better is one day with God than 1,000 on a ski field. Deep, deep, deep down, we need to be right with God. And we're not right with God, we stay empty and lonely for God. But if we are right with God and we enjoy and know and worship God, then the secret of pleasure is this. We can enjoy the good gifts he's given us for pleasure, and we can worship the God who's given us these gifts in relationship with God, and that's where we get the purpose we're looking for. God has made us to both enjoy pleasure and to enjoy him. But if we only look for pleasure, we stay empty and lonely for God. But if we worship and love God, then that gives us the relationship, the context where we can enjoy the good gifts that God has given us for pleasure.
No pain, no gain. It's a common slogan at work. Rather than be afraid of it, you just take it on, right? The idea of pain. Can pain be a good thing, especially when you survive it? Does it build resilience?
Can pain be a good thing? Well, I think Paul Dolan gets it right. So he argues to be happy, we need both pleasure and purpose. And often the things that are purposeful aren't pleasant, but are painful. So that's the thing that has to balance it out. So as I said, pleasure is a good thing, by and large, in general, because it's wise and it's a drive to stay alive and survive. But at the same time, it itself won't give us purpose, and it's purpose that we need. And often purposeful things are painful things, like childbirth, helping a friend move house, and studying for an exam, which were the examples that Paul Dolan gave. Interestingly enough, what was I going to say? Well, I'll just share with this. Stephen Biddulph, in his book on manhood, points out that some of the most influential people in the last few centuries, they actually had very painful lives, like Nelson Mandela, Martin Luther King, and a lot of very influential people were orphaned at a very early age. They lost their parents. So they had very painful upbringing. Out of that they end up with a very rich, fulfilling life. So it really is one of balance. Yes, we need pleasure, but we also need purpose, and often purposeful things are painful things. And Paul Dolan, I think, is right. We need a balance. It's a both and. It's not an either or. It's a both and. Because if all we have is pleasure, then we sort of have emptiness but no purpose. If all we have is pain, then it actually breaks us. We cannot be sustained. Every now and then we need pleasurable things as well. And I think that's what the writer in Ecclesiastes is arguing. If we have a look at those passages, he's saying he was just chasing after pleasure, but he also actually needed to chase the God behind it to have the purpose of the relationship. But in both, he could have found the happiness he was looking for.
I've just got to ask this one question. I
Sure.
found it funny. So, how in the world do you get a PhD in happiness and laughter?
I don't know. I don't know, but they've run out of things. We do run out of things to do PhDs on, don't we? Yeah. But I did a PhD. The hardest thing was I did my PhD in the humanities. So in the sciences, every day you turn up and do an experiment. But in the humanities, people just keep going, what are you doing? And it's very hard explaining. And this is what I was doing. I remember you'd wake up and you think, oh, I'm tired. So you sleep in and you get up at 10. You start reading a book and you think, oh, I'm tired. So you have a nap again. And then you have lunch and you start reading the book again. You think, oh, I'm tired. So you have a nap. And then you get up and think, oh, I should go for a run, wake myself up. So you go for a run. Now it's dinner time. And you pull out your book again. You start reading. And you suddenly realise, oh, it's not relevant. This chapter has got nothing to do with what I'm after. And so that's a day. That's the day in a PhD students. It's very hard explaining to your friends and your parents who keep ringing up, so what are you doing? But just relax. It's all in the vibe.
There you go. Great. Okay, here's a little bit more serious question. If pleasure is good, why does Jesus say to his followers that they should deny themselves or take up their cross daily?
Okay. So it's all, again, the balance and understanding who we are and how we're designed. And so throughout the Christian tradition, we've struggled with this. But an easy way of understanding this is God has designed us as both body and spirit. And part of the struggle is understanding how to manage both body and spirit. So sometimes sometimes in Christianity there's a movement called asceticism, where we deny our bodies, deny ourselves material pleasures, and it's all about the spirit, and that's asceticism. And it owes a lot to Greek thought, because in Greek thought the material world was evil or dirty. And the opposite end would be what's called syncretism, where we over-embrace the material world and we ignore the spiritual side. But the Bible and the gospel about Jesus says it's actually a both and. We need to embrace both. And the solution is understanding how Jesus came to us, not just as spirit, but as spirit and body. So somehow the body is good and it needs to be looked after. And we need a both and. And Paul, when he writes to in his letter to the Corinthians, in 1 Corinthians, is sort of dealing with both camps, the ascetics and the people who are syncretists. And especially in chapter 6 and 7, he's dealing with sex and marriage. In chapter 7, he's dealing with the ascetics who think now that we're Christians, we're above needing bodily pleasures or needs. So they argue as Christians now we don't need to be married. And then in chapter 6, he's arguing with a syncretist who says, well, now we can do anything we want with our body. So it's sort of a tension of getting it both right. We need to look after both spirit and body. But why does Jesus say, deny ourselves this? I think he's saying, deny yourself the narrative or the purpose you want in life. Instead, embrace the narrative or purpose that Jesus wants you. So no longer, it's about a journey. No longer follow your journey, but deny your journey and now follow Jesus and let him be the purpose that we need in life. So our purpose and adventure is now the purpose and adventure that Jesus gives us.
Okay. All right. Are there any questions from the crowd or anything you want to push back or have Sam clarify? All right. And
the following question then, well, what is his purpose? What is his journey that Jesus gives us? And is it both a matter of being and doing? In the West, we always think we have to do something to get purpose. But in the non-Western world, it's about being as well as doing. And interestingly, Aristotle and the ancient Greeks understood that, sometimes the purpose is just to be who you are in your nature and be appropriate to your nature. So what is the purpose? Aristotle's famous example was the acorn. What is the purpose of an acorn? Is to become an oak tree. And so it's good if you become a flourishing oak tree. And what is our nature and purpose? Well, according to the Bible, we've been made in the image of God. That's our nature and purpose. And we will flourish when we know God and we're in a rich, flourishing relationship with God. So sometimes it's just about being. And that is our purpose. That's the journey that Jesus wants from us, just to be in a rich, flourishing relationship with Jesus, just to be. But now that we are, of course, Jesus has a project for us to do. And we have at least 2 projects. One, God puts his spirit in us to make us more and more like Jesus. So he cleanses us and changes us from the inside out. I always give the analogy, before I got married, I used to live in an apartment by myself. and life was simple. It was very nice. And then my wife moved in when we got married, and she renovated the whole inside. She brought in pot plants in to make the place look nice. She put curtains in. She put soap in the bathroom. There had been no soap in the bathroom before. And people come and go, wow, this place is different. It's nice. And it's almost the same. God's Holy Spirit moves into us, and he starts renovating it to be the place where he would actually want to live. And he changes us from the inside out. But God also wants us to be a blessing to others in the same way he's been a blessing to us. And now we go about changing the world, bringing God's love, mercy, and justice. So it's about being. I'm a child of God. It's about doing. I'm getting renovated from the inside out. And I'm also bringing God's love, mercy, and justice in the same way he gave me his love, mercy, and justice.